We have a great panel with us today to break all of this down. MS Now legal affairs reporter Fallon Gallagher is outside the court right now. MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin is here at the table with me, as well as our legal analysts. I have former Manhattan Assistant DA Catherine Christian and former U.S. Attorney Barb McQuade. It is so good to have all of you. Fallon, I'm going to start with you, though. So Chief Justice John Roberts wrote both of these decisions here, but the Cook and Slaughter decisions sort of represent a mixed bag. Walk me through how the court split.
Yeah, the chief wrote both of these opinions, which is not surprising because typically he takes the biggest ones for himself, the thorniest cases. Now, the way that this split is perhaps the least surprising decision that we've seen thus far, and that's because the court kind of tipped their hand much earlier when they decided to take both of these cases from the emergency docket. You'll remember they allowed Lisa Cook to remain in her job while this litigation continued, but they allowed President Trump to fire Rebecca Slaughter. So now today, the court is denying the Trump administration's request for a stay of a lower court order that blocked Lisa Cook's firing. That means she gets to stay in her job. But also, unsurprisingly, the court is sort of punting on the overall question of whether or not the president can fire a member of the Fed. Now, they've signaled very strongly in this opinion that they view the Fed differently, but for now, this will go back to the lower court. As far as Slaughter, I cannot underscore how fundamentally this will reshape executive power. Of course, the big headline case for this term will probably be birthright citizenship, but this case is so significant for the president's executive authority. They are overturning nearly a century of their own precedent and allowing the president to fire independent agency heads at will. Now, of course, before there had been statutory protections where it had to be for cause, either for malfeasance or negligence or something like that. Now the president is going to have the authority to change that. And the chief actually signaled that during arguments pretty clearly. He was talking about the way that when Humphrey's executor, which is the court's precedent of 91 years, was decided, the executive branch looked very different and these agencies had much less power. But now, of course, they have significant more authority and the court views that as too far. So that is a 6-3 Roberts opinion along ideological lines, whereas Cook is 5-4, also Roberts, but not along ideological lines. But Slaughter, I cannot underscore how significant this will be for the president's authority going forward. This is a court that continues to hand this president unprecedented authority. Antonia?
Well, Fallon, on that, in the Slaughter case here, what did we hear from Justice Sonia Sotomayor? It sounds like it was an incredibly intense and strong reaction there in her dissent.
Yeah, this is also really remarkable. Justice Sotomayor delivered her dissent for 20 minutes. And I want to put this into context for people who aren't really familiar with how this goes. Usually whoever writes the majority opinion will deliver a summary of their opinion from the bench. And the dissent doesn't always go. Sometimes they'll go for a few minutes. Of course, there was a fiery back and forth last week with Justice Jackson and Justice Alito. But today, Sotomayor went on for 20 minutes. And our producer inside says that she was visibly angry about this ruling. She talks about how the court continues to enhance an absolutist executive theory, and they are handing the president unprecedented power to reshape this branch of government. She is incredibly worked up.
So, Lisa, is Humphrey's executor
Antonia?
Essentially a shell of itself now?
It's definitely overturned by this court. And I want to dovetail onto something that Fallon said, because, again, I don't think we can overstate the importance of the Slaughter decision. For many of our viewers, today is going to be about the mail-in ballot decision, right? The fact that 18 states and territories are going to be able to continue to count ballots that are cast before Election Day but received after. But that largely keeps in place the status quo, right? Or maybe leaves for another day the question of whether Congress can change that. This, on the other hand, the Slaughter decision, is a sea change in how our federal government will be run, and specifically these bipartisan, multi-member agencies and commissions that are suffuse throughout the federal government. Antonia, if I can, I want to read to you a little bit from Justice Sotomayor's dissent, because I think it underscores what's at stake here. She says, today's decision profoundly undermines this reliance, meaning the reliance on expertise in these agencies, and as a result, undercuts one side of the balance that the political branches struck. Put simply, today the majority reshapes our government. And then she details what she means by that. Dozens of independent commissions are now likely to become purely executive agencies, shifting tremendous power over broad swaths of American life into the president's hands. And then she tells us what she means. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, with responsibility for managing the nation's energy supply. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, which protects Americans against harms caused by dangerous goods. The Chemical Safety Board, tasked with investigating chemical disasters. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, responsible for the regulation of nuclear power. And the Merit Systems Protection Board, that is the agency that's charged with ensuring the integrity of our civil service. And as you know, with agencies like the Department of Justice, and here I'm now not talking about her opinion anymore, I'm giving you some context. The Department of Justice, as well as many agencies, has been hollowed out by this administration, firing all sorts of people that were understood to have civil service protections. Some of them have tried to sue in federal courts. And in some cases, if not most cases, the courts have said to them, no, the way that the statute is set up, you're supposed to seek redress from this Merit Systems Protection Board. It's a lengthy administrative process to get your job back in the civil service. Now with the court saying that the president can hire and fire people who belong to this Merit Systems Protection Board at will, it just means that sort of the civil service is itself now illusory. The idea that we would have people in what we have traditionally understood as career government service, free from partisanship, is now going to be subject to an agency that itself can be layered throughout with loyalists from the same president. That should send a chill throughout Americans all over this country. The safety and security of things like our energy supply, what drugs you take, whether or not your elections have integrity as decided by a bipartisan group of Democrats and Republicans appointed at different times, all of that is now up for grabs by this particular president and presidents to come.
Well, given the stakes and potential politicization here, Catherine, what exactly is the governing philosophy that allows the Supreme Court to put all of these federal agencies under the executive's thumb, but then allows them to also say, well, no, the Fed is different?
Well, Lisa is exactly right. If you believe that the president, any president, should have complete control over the executive branch, you're very happy today because of this decision. It is the unitary executive, which has been just affirmed by the Supreme Court. Now, in terms of the Lisa Cook decision, it was a very narrow decision. She has not won yet. They are allowing her to continue her litigation, which means that allows the government to come up with for-cause reasons. Could that be an indictment? I'm not saying it's going to happen, but that is a for-cause reason.
And can I interject there for a second? We already have a statement from the acting director of national intelligence, Bill Pulte. But when Bill Pulte was the head of the Federal Housing Financing Agency, he is the person that jump-started an investigation against Lisa Cook for alleged mortgage fraud. His statement on X, Antonia, in response to the Cook decision today, says the following sentence: "As I have repeatedly said, I believe Lisa Cook will be indicted for mortgage fraud." In other words, whether or not the president can fire her for cause, as Catherine just said, is still very much up in the air and contested. She lives to see another day. The court has articulated now the legal standards that will govern whether or not she can be fired. But the facts of whether or not she can be fired, that survives. And that goes back down to a lower court. Now, it almost seems as if there is an incentive for the Trump administration to rush to indict Lisa Cook. And whether or not there are people in the Justice Department who will tolerate that, that also remains to be seen under acting attorney general and the nominee for the permanent slot, Todd Blanche.
Well, Barb, I want to bring you into this conversation and the role that Bill Pulte plays in all of this, just given his history of using this housing agency for political aims. Now he's also taking on the 18 spy agencies. He's effectively top spy chief, at least for the time being here. So given this expansion now of the president's powers, the role that he himself is publicly telegraphing that he wants to play in all of this, does this not make matters, not just the stakes higher, but matters more complicated for Republicans who had at points thought they kind of had worked out a deal here with the president on some of this, wanted to make sure that they played a role in keeping the Fed independent? They had a vested, I would say all Americans have a vested interest in that. But what happens now with the way that you're reading how the pieces are going to fall?
Well, I completely agree with Lisa that this is a sky is falling moment, because we have now seen the Supreme Court enshrine the unitary executive theory, overturn Humphrey's executor. And I think perhaps destroy the deep state, as Donald Trump calls it, which I call the professional civil service, and perhaps a return to what we saw before 1883 when Congress passed the Pendleton Act, a return to a spoil system where the president cleans house. We no longer have professional career experts in these positions, but the president's cronies who are there to serve his political aims. But the only silver lining, perhaps, I can find in this, Antonia, is exactly what Bill Pulte has said today, which is calling for an indictment. I wonder if it doesn't cause this overreach and this recognition of just how much damage this president has wrought on our federal government, and if it doesn't cause them to perhaps be more scrutinizing in President Trump's appointees. If you're going to say the president gets to fire anybody at will, maybe they ought to be more careful who they affirm. The power that Congress has, of course, is the power to confirm some of these nominees. And whether it's, Bill Pulte, of course, is just an acting, but could do so much damage there as the head of our National Intelligence Office. But when it comes to people like Todd Blanche and others who get these permanent positions, maybe Congress ought to be a little more careful in affirming and confirming some of these appointees that President Trump wants to lead these important federal agencies.